Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to another episode of Soul Over Matter podcast. I'm your host, Michelle, and today we have a special guest on Soul Over Matter. We have Jana Wilson. She is an author of a prescriptive memoir, Wise Little One, Learning to Love and Listen to My Inner Child. She is also an emotional healing educator. Jana, welcome to Soul Over Matter. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Michelle, for having me. I'm doing wonderful.
I'm so happy to hear it. I'm so happy to have you on and share your story and share, your experiences in this lifetime, right? It's a roller coaster. It's a wild ride.
It certainly has been.
So I have just finished your book, Wise Little One, and reading that book, we haven't really touched on inner child in Soul Over Matter. So let's start there. Let's start with sharing what is the inner child?
That's a beautiful question. So the inner child is our emotions. When we're little, we really, the brain doesn't fully develop till we're about 25. And so from birth to 7, we call that the developmental years. And everything that we're perceiving and sensing is through the filter of our emotions. And so, I have a grandson, he just turned 7. I actually launched the book on his birthday as a gift to him, because I wrote the book certainly for another level of healing, but for my family, for future generations, to really know that I was a cycle breaker, that learning to, in the 90s is when I first really started to hear about inner child work and how to relate with the inner child. And of course, my family of origin was very dysfunctional. And I knew it was a PBS special. I was living in South Florida. John Bradshaw was the author, and he had written a book called Healing the Shame That Binds You. And he was a really big authority on dysfunctional families and, really healing a lot of, growing up and with alcoholics or addicts. And my father was an alcoholic. My mother was mentally ill. So I had a lot of stuff from my childhood, and I became a young mother. And I knew someone out there had the information to help me heal. And so inner child work, I felt like such a bad girl, in college. I was very promiscuous. I didn't respect or value myself. I was living in, the 80s in Miami. Time magazine listed it one of the most dangerous places to live. It was cocaine cowboys. And so I had a really fast life, right, of drugs, rock and roll, and partying. And once I started to discover the inner child, I thought, oh, if I could relate with myself like a pure and innocent little girl, maybe I could heal. And so that's what the inner child is. It's our pure essence.
Pure essence. Beautiful. Yeah. And sharing about your childhood in this book, right? You are raw, you are deep. Anyone listening, I highly recommend reading this book if you've gone through trauma as a child and are working, with that part of us, because it's within all of us. So I'd love to know what prompted you to write about your story, your experiences.
Well, the book was in me for a long time. I can remember when my daughter was, I had her at 22. So around my early 30s, I started to think I would like to write a book. And at first I thought it would be a novel, right? Because then books began to come out that were memoirs, and I really loved that genre. And one of my favorite was The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. And, it reminded me a lot of my childhood. Her parents were a little, crazy, and she ended up successful and she did well. So I was very inspired by these real life stories of people overcoming their trauma. So that's was the initial, and I began to write and just dump. I had on my computer a file that I would just write stories of memories. And of course, my mom was alive at that time, and my father was as well, and grandmother. And I would ask them questions and, really be kind of like a sleuth wanting to understand. And then I began working, later in my late 30s with Debbie Ford, who was a New York Times bestselling author. And I think when you're really close to somebody who's done what you're wanting to do, it makes it even more tangible. Like, I can do this. And I began to think, okay, it's not a self-help book. It's my stories. There is prescription to it. And as you know, I took 11 chapters and I added little, almost kind of like something for you to think about, a prescription, maybe a journal prompt, something, a question to ask the reader based on what I shared in that chapter. So I didn't realize, I created this system called the Emotional Healing System, and I've been leading retreats and doing this work for 19 years. And of course, you get to a place where you do your work, heal thyself, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing my work, and then I feel like I'm in a really good place, right? I manifest and I attract my beloved, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready. I came out of meditation. It was February of 2022, and I heard very clearly, it's time to write the book. And I sat down at the computer, and I knew I would need help, like an editor, or, I needed support. And before, I'd never found anyone, and it was timing, timing's everything. So I found someone, and she actually specialized in telling people's stories of trauma, overcoming trauma.
Mm.
So I interviewed her, and I loved her. She was out of Nashville, and she also had a lot of trauma from her childhood. And so we really connected. And we would just go back and forth. I would send her stories, and she would ask me questions, and we would just really, and I think the book turned out really well in the descriptions and the flow of how easy it is to read. Wouldn't you say? Yeah.
Yes, it almost felt like I was sitting alongside with your inner child. I was sitting along with you, and anyone reading this, right, who has gone through any kind of trauma, because we all go through trauma in our lives.
Absolutely.
And there's this thing about minimizing our trauma, right? Having complex PTSD, it's like we'll minimize what has happened to us, or we block it out, right? We could talk about that as well. But yeah, no, the way the story, your experiences, your life, it flowed. It felt like I was with you. I was experiencing all that you are experiencing, which is healing in a way, right? Whenever we have also experienced some form of trauma, it's healing to that inner child. And I actually am now just thinking, because I do follow you on Instagram, you were sharing, we could talk about this quickly, but you were sharing how you don't like putting a trigger warning on things. You believe that if we are meant to see something, we're meant to see something, and it actually helps us heal more.
Right. Because if we can't feel it, we can't heal it. And so, and research even shows that, trauma warnings don't prevent the person from watching or reading, or, trauma defined. So we look at trauma like big T, little t. I don't even like those labels, because my trauma to me is my trauma. It's personal. My mom used to have a saying. She said, if that person's leg is broke, but your finger's broke, it doesn't negate your finger, right? Like, you can't compare our traumas. And, yes, I had an adverse childhood trauma. There's a test. Have you ever looked at it? There's 10 questions. It's called the ACE test, ACE, Adverse Childhood Experience. And there's only 10 questions. And I remember when I took it, I answered yes to all 10. And, that kind of freaked me out. I was a little like, oh God, like I really did experience a lot, because I had minimized it. And I think, minimizing it was a survival mechanism, right? It was a way I adapted to be like, oh, I can get over it. so writing the book, to go back to answering your question, why did I write the book? I thought like I had healed a lot of that. Obviously, I understand as emotional healing educator, healing is a lifelong journey, right? We peel back a layer, we feel good. It's kind of the upward spiral, right? We evolve up and then we get there and then we come back and we're back down here. And if we start making it mean, oh gosh, we've regressed or we haven't, because as soon as we go to our next level again, we're higher than we were before. But this is what life is. It's like this upward spiral, right, of growth. So the book, it was hard. It wasn't easy. I wrote it in 9 months. It was finished and really complete with all the, a book has to go through beta readers and, developmental editors and proofreaders. A lot of eyes have to be on the book to make sure. And rereading it, I noticed there was a period missing somewhere, or there, nothing's, it's wabi-sabi, right? It becomes like perfectly imperfect. But I had like this thick skin as I was writing the book that I was like, I can't go there, but sometimes I had to step back. And then I went into the studio recently to read it for Audible, and I had an emotional breakdown. I think, revisiting all the stories and it was really surreal, because when you read a book, do you ever listen to books on tape?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like acting.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to be my dad and his voice and, cussing and then I had to put on a Southern accent and, I had to do these like voices, and oh my gosh, I came out of there. I emerged 6 hours later, completely like traumatized, re-traumatized. And I thought, okay, I have to find a different way to record this book. I can't do it like in these big chunks, because it does open up, more healing. But hey, that's what we're here for, right? Is to keep peeling back until it's an unbecoming, right? We're not becoming anything. We're unbecoming what we thought we were. And yeah, it's a beautiful process. It really is. So
unbecoming is one of my favorite words.
is it? I love it.
Because it, like you shared before, right? It's we're born as pure essence. We're born as this white light, right? This purity. And you shared that like birth to 7, right? It's like we're so pure that we are sponges, we're computers to our reality. And I love in the book how you share when you came to the realization that you chose your mother and you chose your father, because that can be such a triggering statement, right? For people to be like, why would I choose abuse? Why would I choose an alcoholic father? Why would I choose a depressed mother? Why would I do that? So I would love to hear how it felt to come to that realization when you found that out, like, oh, I chose this.
Well, after, finished going to school and kind of being on this journey, and then I find out I'm pregnant, and I'd had a couple of abortions, and I didn't really harbor a lot of guilt or anything about that, but this pregnancy felt different. It felt like my teacher. It felt like a soul contract. There was something different. And I really wasn't consciously on a spiritual path at that time at 22. I was still partying and, but
living the human journey.
Very much. But something shifted. I had the big awakening at 12, right? But this is 10 years later, and a lot happened between 12 years old and 22. And yeah, I was like, okay, well, I got to get it together. I can't repeat what my parents did. I have no role models to show me what a healthy relationship. Her biological father was an addict and a drunk. I was making the same choices. I was just repeating everything from my childhood. And I got serious because now I was bringing in a life, and I had made that decision to do it. And I felt like it was the right decision. And of course it was. I had to end up going back to live with my mother, which was very difficult. And I had to face a lot of those demons from my childhood. And I talk about that in the book. But the book, Many Lives, Many Masters, I lived in South Florida. Dr. Brian Weiss was in Miami. So we're talking about 89, 90, like, late 80s, early 90s. And the book changed my life because I grew up in the Bible Belt. I talk about it in the book. My family of origin, the religion that I was fed was very scary, fire and brimstone. So, and reincarnation is definitely not accepted in the West. We can go East and we can see that, children will have memory, spontaneous memory of lives before, and be able to validate it. And, it's documented. There's a lot of interesting, research and on that. But when I read in his book that we choose our parents, that there's a contract, everything inside me knew, how you know the truth, because it sets you free. And I was just free. All of a sudden I was empowered. I was no longer a victim of a mother who put a gun to my head, or, a father who molested me, or, I was no longer a victim of my childhood. I was in the driver's seat. I was the one who chose it. So for me, it took me from victimhood to empowerment, right? Because I thought, damn, I must be a pretty badass soul.
A warrior. Mm-hmm.
I mean, ooh, right? I chose like, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so then what is the lesson? If I'm in Earth school and my soul chose this to correct karma, and karma, in the Vedas, karma's taught really just like an accounting system, right? It's not a respecter of anyone, has debits and credits. The soul comes in with them, with seeds from previous incarnations, and some are good, or less. I don't like using, polarity like that, good or bad, but some are credits and some are debits. So I had some debits and I chose to pay them off early. So I could get really clear about what I was here to do. So yes, I had a really turbulent childhood, but looking through the lens of, okay, it all happened for me, not to me. And so then what is the lesson? It was always this overarching lesson for myself and everyone I've worked with, Michelle, is, we aren't taught to love and value ourselves and put ourselves first. And even going to Christianity, the great avatars, the great teachers, Jesus being one of them, said, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, nobody loves their neighbor because they don't love themselves. Everybody's ready to kill each other, because it all comes back to, we are disconnected from self, from the true nature of reality, that we are divine, that we're not separate from the creator. There's nothing outside of us. So all of these teachings started just to come into my life in my early 20s. And of course, I really woke up and got serious and remembered how I opened the book. Can I share that?
Yeah, of course.
So had a lot of trauma up to the age of 12. Right before this event, had a lot of suicide ideation, had been behaving in ways that I was really imploding at 12 and hating myself, wanting to die. So was contemplating mom's Valiums, a bottle of aspirin, anything. Like, what could I do to just, it wouldn't hurt. I would just go to sleep. And of course, it was another violent domestic violence between my mother and father, him beating her. And my brother had always been there, but he was a teenager at this point and he was gone a lot. And so all of a sudden I ran outside, and I lived in Central Florida, and we lived in a trailer. I was labeled trailer trash. I had all those labels and stigma on me. I hated my life. In other words, it was not an easy life to live. And I'm in the yard wringing my hands, praying to God to save me. And I had what is called a near-death experience. So in NDEs, your consciousness, so you're aware of everything that's happening, but I was pulled out of the body. I could see my body. I could hear the screaming from my parents. And I was one with the cosmos. I was nestled and held, and I felt a peace that every time I tell this story, it makes me emotional, because I am so blessed through my trauma that I have had such a close relationship with the Holy Spirit, with the divine, with the field, the universe, whatever you want to call it, with source, that it's just always been there. And I'm very clairaudient, so I hear it. And I felt the peace, and I was good with it. I was like, hey, if I'm dead, I'm good with this. Cause I'd been
This
thinking
feels
about
good.
dying. Right. So I was like, I'm good. And then I heard, those are not your parents. Very clear. That is not your life. And I could kind of see my little provincial town and the oppression of it. And I was aware of all of it, and the earth. And it was like, but it was telling me, even the earth, like that is not your life. This is. And when I heard this is, I have an image of Jesus meditating in the desert, and it's like the Milky Way is tapped into his head and his crown chakra. It was like that. I was just like, just one with, I am the universe. I was one with it. And boom, I was back in my body. But that experience woke me up to such a degree, Michelle, that the dragon slayer got ignited. My throat chakra opened, and the soul that I am came forth and went, it just roared at my dad and my mother, and talked about the elephant in the room, and began to call adults out on their BS and speak truth, because I was being gaslit a lot. Mom's crying, oh, I'm fine, I'm okay, whatever it was always, if it's white, it's black, if it's black, it's white. So I got really clear, these people do not know anything. I can't look to them for answers. I began to not trust authority. I didn't look at adults as, oh, they are all knowing. I turned within, and I listened to that still small voice, and it just kept deepening and deepening and deepening. And it led me to, to who I am and where I am today.
Wow. Oh, you're helping so many souls, Jana, like reading your book. Yeah. I remember reading that part, and it's just, it's overwhelming, right? To have that polarity, right? You were 12. You're in this density. I always talk about Earth being a school too. And my past episodes, like my listeners know, I'm always sharing, I love Dolores Cannon. So Earth is a school. We're here, we're in session, and most of us did not sign up for easy lessons. And, you shared too, like being that warrior, that dragon slayer. So what do you feel like, how I'm sure there's some people listening, like, how did you know, right? How did you know at 12, like all of these universal truths, and sharing, maybe your soul too, like how you knew at soul level who you were, and that this was just an illusion, honestly.
Yeah, that's such a great, at the time, obviously I didn't know. As I grew, I knew, the only thing I did know is I knew more than the adults around me, that I was surrounded by people that didn't have a connection like me. I even went back to the church and told them they had it all wrong, and was kicked out of church. I mean,
That
I'm
throat
12 years
chakra
old. I'm like,
activated.
I'm having conversations with God way before Neil Donald Walsh wrote the book. I'm like, and God told me that you don't have to be a Christian to go to heaven. Actually, there is no heaven. That's just, like, they were like, okay, you're speaking to the devil. You're out of here. So thankfully they did that for me. They did me a favor. They showed me who they really were. They were real Christians. I'm sure Jesus wouldn't have done that. So it's kind of like Gandhi said, I love your Jesus. It's your Christians I have a problem with. And I do. I love Jesus. He's definitely one of my teachers. But, I've come to learn that we're all operating, obviously, at different states of consciousness. Now, as a young child, my earliest memory is 18 months. I talk about being in the womb, and I only do that in a poetic way. Of course, I don't have consciousness of what I did in the womb, which I'll leave that for no spoiler alert, because I don't want to spoil it for people. But at 18 months, I remember still operating with this sense of I wanted to be back where I had been, which, I was still tethered. I think babies under the age of 2 are still very tethered to the other world, to the other dimension where they came from. And so at 18 months, I consciously put myself in a swimming pool to try to drown, right? So I could check out. So my mom was being beaten while she was pregnant with me. I mean, we know the connection between a baby that a parent, I just worked with a young woman who had to withdraw from heroin as an infant because her mother was a heroin addict. We know that connection, but there's not a lot of research or study on depression or, abuse while the baby's in utero, so I was taking a steady diet, right, of cortisol and stress hormones, and we're sentient beings. I was feeling it all the feels. And I was like, I don't like this, get me out of here. But I later learned, there's this saying, a lot of people would say to my daughter, Taylor, who's turning 35 this week, you're an old soul. Oh, your daughter's an old soul, because she was so alert and aware at such a young age. Well, of course, she chose me to be her mother. And, she's a beautiful soul. But I am as well. And I didn't know that, of course, then, but my shaman, someone here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, who I've worked with, introduced me to a teaching called the Michael teachings. And it's channeled material, just like Abraham with Esther Hicks and the Abraham teachings, and a lot of the Seth teachings. There's a lot of different channel teachings. And the Michael teachings, says that we're in this, as you said before, this dense, physical plane. Above us, of course, is astral. And then when we go to Akashic, and I can't remember them all the way up to the Buddhaic plane, which is very similar in science to like the string theory, right, of the different dimensions. But that our souls are coming into this earth, this domain, at different stages of consciousness, right? Different levels of soul. So when you were young, I thought about this a lot, and I know your answer already. You had awareness that you had privilege, right? Yeah. I can remember, even though we were poor, I was on welfare, we had food scarcity, we had, I was aware, even in the 70s, that I was privileged, that I was born in America, and that there were people in parts of this world that did not have opportunity and privilege as I did. Very young, I knew that. Awareness of that by watching, I think it was not National Geographic back then, it was called Mutual of Omaha, and they had some Sunday program, and it would show like these indigenous tribes, and a lot of poverty, or like think of Yemen, where they don't even have a home. And so those are infant souls. There's souls that come in that are still dealing with survival in a real sense, their life expectancy. Listen, if you and I grew up in the Congo, our vulva would be cut out at 12. It's horrible, the things that are happening on the planet, as you know. Infant souls deal with this. As the soul progresses, according to this teaching, there's 7 levels. You might spend 100 lifetimes on one level within one soul age. Then you move on to the next soul age, and the next soul age is a baby soul. Now, babies have stranger danger. Babies seek familiarity. Think about what groups of people, usually fundamentalist religion, they seek to make others like them. They don't want, you have to believe the way I do, or this is going to happen. It's like a baby. When I learned this was game changer for me, because most of my family have, I don't have a relationship with, because they think I'm of the devil. I'm going to go to hell, or, they don't want to, it's very Christian of them, by the way, but they are babies. When I learned that, I thought to myself, would I get angry at a baby for proselytizing to me or tell? Of course not. I wouldn't patronize them. I would have compassion. I would understand they're operating from their level of consciousness, and it's okay. They're a baby, right? They need to be told what to believe. They need to be told what to do, just like babies need to be told, don't run into the road. Don't touch that. It's hot. Then the soul keeps growing. It goes into a young soul. Now, America collectively is a young soul country, right? Because we are materialistic, we consume, we want to look young. It's all young souls are very driven by materialism and by object referring, right, to this world. Then the soul keeps advancing, it goes into or keeps learning its lessons, because we don't like to use words like advance or higher.
It's the hierarchy.
Right. It's just where they're at on this, the Tao is what this is all based on too. And so then you go into mature souls. Mature souls are relationship oriented, interpersonal. They want to understand relationship themselves. A lot of times there's a lot of drama in the early levels of a mature soul. They keep advancing. You get to old souls. Early level old souls are visionaries. They come in. By the time when I was little, I was preaching to all the kids in the neighborhood. I knew I was here for a purpose. You're laughing because you were too.
Oh yeah. Little leaders in the playground.
Yes, exactly. So early level old souls are here to make a difference. They're very focused on that. And then as they advance, they're in ashrams, monasteries, nunneries. They're in the Himalayas somewhere. They're not playing the householder game anymore. They're bringing the consciousness up. So I'm somewhere in that early to mid old soul in my reading. That's what I was told. It certainly resonates the most. What drives me more than anything is making a difference. So that's kind of, I think, why I knew the things I knew at such a young age.
Yeah, that what we call the claircognizance, right? Just a deep knowing, there's no research. The research we have is our past lives. It's not tangible. It's not scientific. It's just a deep knowing. And I love you sharing that. Like, yeah, we wouldn't be angry at a baby, right? We wouldn't be angry at a child who's learning. So this brings me to the reparenting, right, that you had to do, right, with these babies as parents, right, who didn't know how to regulate emotions, who were acting out of fear and survival. So how did you reparent yourself? Can you share some tools and tips that helped you become a parent for yourself?
Well, first, when I was still at home, I think in some ways I did reparent myself, not realizing it at that time, because anytime we go through trauma, if we can create an inner resource or have a resource. So my granny was my resource. And then my inner resource was my imagination. And children love imagination. I mean, that's what they thrive on it. They live in a sense of wonder. And so as a child, maybe a psychologist might call it disassociation, but I was going into my inner world and making it more real than the outer world. And so by doing that, I believe that was a sort of reparenting myself, because my soul was so wise. It knew how to get me through these situations. Cannabis was also a resource for me through high school. It certainly saved my life, helped me go into witnessing awareness and stay detached, right? Helped me keep my eye on a vision of the future, of getting out of that small town, that small low consciousness, all of that. It supported me for a time during that. So I definitely, bow to the herb of cannabis. A lot of things that Mother Earth provides for us that supports us. And then, but once I started learning, so, I told you I heard the guy on PBS, and I went to one of his workshops, And he took us through a process. I talk about it in the book. I don't share this, but you're going to remember this in the book. Remember when I'm at my aunt's house and something appears, a woman appears in a state of distress. And I think it's like an angel or, this blonde lady. And she tells me everything's going to be okay. It was my future self. And I believe I time traveled. At 31, when I went to his workshop, he guided us through a hypnotherapy. It was very deep. And he said, go to a time when you were in the most distress as a child. Be there for the child. Tell the child that everything's going to be okay. Reassure them, let them know that you're there. And that was the experience I went to. And then when I was writing the book, I remembered that experience at my aunt's house, and I put it together with the experience at 31. So I think that's what happened. But reparenting now, how it looks for me, I teach it in 3 stages. Usually the intro is shadow work. That's what my professional training's in. So I'm triggered, my emotions, I'm affected by something, my buttons are pushed. I use it as an entry point to talk to little Jana. So what is it? What's happening? Somebody's mirroring something, something's happening outside. It's, some emotions getting triggered, or it could be internal. I could be focusing on something, telling myself a story, some narrative, creating anxiety. Soon as I start to identify the feeling, I relate with it like a child, little Jana. So she's feeling anxious. So I know anxiety is not a normal, natural feeling of being human. Now, if fear is in present danger, but if I'm afraid and I'm not in the face of a tiger or a bear, it must be something that I'm telling myself that's making me afraid. So that's not real, right? The acronym for fear, false evidence appearing real, right? So I use that as the entry point to reparent. So I know core feelings and wounded feelings. So anxiety is a wounded, and I like to use it as an example because a lot of people suffer from general anxiety disorder, right? A lot of prescriptions are prescribed for this, and it's all being created by us, right? A story we're telling ourselves that's creating the anxiety. Now I have little Jana here. She's about 4 or 5 years old. She's the sweetest thing. I always keep on my phone or pictures of myself, as a little girl. And I really will connect with her. I'll look at the picture and I'll close my eyes and I'll say, okay, I have an intent to understand what you're telling me. So intentions are the most important thing because they drive our behavior. So I have an intent to understand what you're feeling, Jana. So tell me, what am I saying to you that's making you feel anxious? And I also simultaneously call in spirit because I know I can't do it alone sometimes. I mean, I need support. So I call in the big guns.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I connect with my crown chakra, call in spirit into my heart, be an emissary to spirit, right? A conduit, hold little Jana emotions. I create some space. Now I'm a healthy adult because healthy adults reparent themselves. They care for themselves. So little Jana sits here. I say, tell me what I'm telling you. Show me what I'm doing. What relationship am I staying in? What boundaries am I not setting? What am I doing that's making you feel anxious? I take responsibility. And she says, oh, well, you're telling me, I'm getting ready to, or the book's been a source of anxiety some, like, or you're telling me that person who gave, a bad review and I'm a bad girl and I'm not that smart and you're talking mean to me in my internal dialogue. And I see it. And of course I ho'oponopono, I'm sorry, please forgive me. I love you. I see I'm doing that, and then I ask spirit, what is the false belief? Oh, I believe I have to be perfect. I got to be good enough. I got to prove myself. Some false belief, that I've operated from for eons. And what is the truth? You're divine. You don't, you don't need to add anything to yourself. You just as you are. So I bring that truth to the little girl. I tell her exactly what I'm hearing spirit tell me. And then maybe I might go to the mirror and talk to myself and say it to my adult self. You know, I love and accept you just as you are. I love and accept you even when people don't like you. You know, I'm proud of you. I'm so happy to be you. So I really feed myself with words of affirmation and love. And then I'll ask spirit, is there something I need to do? So I got that message recently. You don't need to read reviews. You didn't write the book for reviews. So don't read it. And I've got amazing reviews, but the mind, the human mind, the ego,
the monkey
it'll get
mind.
100 good ones in one, and it'll focus on the one. So yeah, it's real simple. It's a 3-step process, really, of reparenting.
And so that's what you teach in your emotional healing retreats with clients. Do you have more of that, of people reparenting themselves and working with that inner child?
Yeah, I think, shadow work is a really big one, because in my training too with Debbie Ford, who wrote Dark Side of the Light Chasers, and I talk about her, complicated relationship with student and teacher, and as it is with often, but she taught me a lot about what not to do as a teacher, which I'm very grateful for. So I don't make the same mistakes, right? And get caught up in my ego. Certainly my ego is my teammate, right? I want to work with it and not negate it, but I'm not the ego, right? I am a soul, and I'm using that part of me. And so shadow work, especially now, we were talking about this retrograde and how it's affecting so many planets and some intense stuff going on the planet. And I'm feeling all the feels of it as an empath for the world and for myself as well. And I feel like hold on one second. Sorry, my dog was drinking. I hope you can edit that.
Oh yes, yeah, I can edit. Okay. No worries.
I was like, okay, where were we?
The world, the grief, the shadow work.
The shadow work. Okay. So shadow work for me, a lot of people, I think today, spiritually bypass. And until a teacher can really meet themselves, and in my book, my intent, because if I'm going to stand in front of people and teach shadow and say I can be everything sometimes, then I need to know if somebody's going to call me out and say, oh, you're materialistic, or, oh, you're a bitch, or, oh, you're disconnected, or you're whatever it is. Yeah, I can be sometimes. Right. So it's the book. I really vulnerably, as courageously shed light and shined all that ugliness, that underbelly, all the labels that I've been that have been placed on me, from whore to white trash to all of it. And the work never ends, as you and I were saying. So I think shadow work in the emotional healing system is probably the real meat of what I teach. And then that's why I said in shadow work, there's 4 steps. One is you identify your shadow. How do you identify it? You're affected or informed, right? Ken Wilber said, when something happens and we have an emotional charge, we're affected. And if the same thing happens and we've healed it, it's just information. There's no more trigger, right? And so if I'm affected, then I know it's mine. Yes, it could be someone else, but I'm helpless over how they behave. If it's affecting me, I have responsibility. I'm 100% responsible for myself and my feelings. So I ask, what kind of person would do that? Or what do I think they think of me? So these reviews, I probably, by the way, will continue to read all the reviews, even the bad ones, because it's great shadow work, right?
If we're affected by it, that means there's something inside of us, right? We can't be affected by something if it's not part of us.
Exactly. And so these people are my teachers that are coming and saying this stuff, and I realize, yes, they could be projecting or whatever, but it doesn't matter. They could be at a certain level of consciousness. They don't get it. But if it's affecting me, then it's a gift. And I can take it and look at it and heal it, so that when the next review comes along and someone says that, I'm just informed. It doesn't bother me anymore, right? That's truly meeting myself and doing the work and not bypassing, right? Or hiding from it. So, I mean, because in the end, we don't care what other people think of us. We only care what we think. And if we do think we care what other thinks, it's just because we agree with them.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, shadow work, identify it. What kind of person would do that? Or what do I think they think of me? Get the quality. Oh, I think they think I'm, arrogant. Okay. Have I ever been arrogant? Am I arrogant presently? Might I be that way in the future? Am I that way to myself? Like abusive. Certainly people say I'm not an abusive person, but they abuse themselves. Then you're an abusive person. This is the most important relationship with self. So shadow work is really powerful. And step 3, you embrace it. That's where I've moved from my work with Debbie Ford. I don't do subpersonality work anymore. I do inner child work. So I move them into embracing the child. Hold the baby, hold the little girl or boy. Tell them, I'm here for you. Be a loving adult to them. I love you even when you are a bitch. I love you even when you act like a petulant child. I love you. There's nothing you can do to take my love from you. That's what heals, not judgment. And then step 4 happens naturally. That's authenticity. That's wholeness. That's when you can stand in front of anyone and say, hey, this is who I am, and not be fake. Right?
You have no need on me, it's like, yep.
Yeah.
I can act like that sometimes.
Yeah. I can be that way sometimes. Yeah. So, I mean, I used to war with the bitch when I met Debbie Ford, and she came on stage in Miami and she's like, I'm Debbie Ford and I'm a bitch. And I was like, I like her because I've been trying to get rid of that part of me. It's like getting rid of your arm. Like it's an integral part of me. My little girl, when you read my story, she grew up in some crazy situations. She had to get tough. I had to fight. I had to do a lot of things. That developed the bitch in me. But I promise you this, I'm not prey. I'm not going to get taken advantage of. And, I can stand up for myself and speak up and have advocate for myself. And that's the little bitch in me.
The integration, right? It's like, especially as women too, it's these labels, because I've read The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. I feel like I read in the beginning of my awakening, and that was like huge, like looking at all these words, because words hold such weight, right? Words are spells. So if we don't want to be associated with that label, we will do everything to avoid it. And then when we're avoiding it, that's when all the people will come and share that part of us that we're doing everything to avoid and to keep in the closet. So yeah, I think shadow work, I love that you said the spiritual bypassing, because we can't do the light work. It's not rainbows and butterflies. Like this life is literally here. The polarity is here, because otherwise, you're bypassing your whole life. Emotions are why we came to this planet. Like we literally came here to feel the depths, the deepest depths and the highest highs. Like that's in my opinion, take what resonates, leave the rest, but that's the definition of living to me, is to really be in service to ourselves and be in service to others. And yeah, as a fellow teacher, we can't expect to help other clients unless we have really gotten deep within ourselves, and that is an ever evolving journey. So thank you for sharing that and just being authentic. My podcast is very authentic, and I knew, I was like, for anyone listening, I get a lot of emails for guests to be on my podcast, and them asking, media like asking, oh, we want so and so to be on your podcast, and I don't tend to answer a lot of them, but for Jana Wilson, there was something there, and now I know why that you're on here, because you had to share your truth, and you embody such a depth, and you share it in such an integrated way to go from that childhood, right, and to move through all those tribulations and lessons, and to come out on the other side, and then carry that lantern. I always say it's like we're carrying the lantern for others. You know, we're
Yes.
not above or below anyone else. And then, yeah, it's truly remarkable. Thank you for being courageous and speaking your truth and sharing your story. I really believe sharing our story is the number one way to, one, heal, and then also help others realize, oh, I'm not alone. That's what you're
Yeah.
doing.
I love that analogy you gave, about going to the depths and to the height. If we want to, think about a skyscraper. In order for them to go really high, they got to go deep into the earth. And it made me realize, because I had an experience recently, I had shared about reading the book, and I had a really dark night of the soul, kind of like, really went into some deep, dark stuff. And how do we know it's daylight? Every day I ask clients, students this, they'll say, well, the sun's out. And I'm like, okay, no, how do we know it's daylight? And most people don't really know the answer to that question. And the answer is because we've experienced
Daylight.
darkness.
Darkness.
Right. So if it was never dark, then we would probably not even have a word called daylight, because we wouldn't have the contrasting experience, right? It's like the saying, there's three mysteries in life: air into a bird, right? The bird's not like, oh, I'm flying through the air, until maybe it's in a cage. Water to a fish, right? Until the fish is taken out of the water. And man into himself. So we're a mystery to ourselves. And so this path that you and I are on, right, is like this unbecoming, right, of the amnesia that we contracted to come into this domain. And I'm sure we do it because it would be probably way too much if we could remember everything from every lifetime. We've got to function here, we've got to do certain things. Like, it would have been too much. So we accepted amnesia, right? We're good with it. But this idea of to the depth of your misery is the height of your ecstasy. And I know every time I allow myself to go there, to the darkest places of, despair and my fears, and I lost my mom last year. I just laid to rest my baby Chihuahua therapy dog that's worked with me for 16 years. She was my companion, she was that little animal soul. My daughter just told me she's pregnant, and I always would say, when Bonita dies, you're going to get pregnant. And
Death
so
and life, right?
yeah. So that's pretty interesting. But Bonita was and so I'm grieving now, it comes in waves, and I just keep breathing into it. But anger, that's what I wanted to talk about, because I had so much anger from my childhood. And just, it's my adaptation to stress, because I feel strong there. I became more like my dad, because my mom was a weak victim. So I wanted, so I use anger. But think about shadow. Like, it's such a cosmic joke. Like, I'm angry, you're angry. Right? I'm judging you for judging. Like, totally, right? Spot it, you got it. The pot calling the kettle black. Usually the very thing that we're judging and pointing the finger, we got three pointing back at us, right, is the very thing that we're doing in the moment. And anger, Robert Augustus Masters wrote a beautiful book, Spiritual Bypassing. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And he talks about, this sacred anger, and that we need that, especially as teachers, listen, I'm the type of teacher, and I tell people when I do an interview with them and they're going to come do private work with me here in Santa Fe, I say, I might not be the teacher for you. Let me explain to you how I work. I believe if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you.
Mm.
So I am fighting for something that you're not connected to, which is your inner child. And if I see you check out, I ask for tech detox, I ask for certain things. And if you don't adhere to what I'm asking, then we either stop the retreat, right? And regroup, or you go home. We end the retreat. I'm going to push, because that's why you're hiring me. You don't know it, right? But you're hiring me to support you to see what you can't see in yourself. And I can't do that if I want them to be my friend, if I want them to like me, if I want to spiritually bypass and just, like, I don't want to upset them. I talk about everything in the space. If somebody is obese, we talk about it. I thought I was coming here for spiritual healing or emotional healing. No. Well, yeah, you are. And you're stuffing yourself and numbing the child. So nothing's off the table, and people have to be okay with that. Group retreats, I don't do that because I'm not that close with people. I just get to go up and be, in my best self and share. I'm not invested in that way. So I'm kind of more at the end of my career with my private work, just because it takes a lot out of me too.
Yeah.
It's a big investment.
To meet people in their depths. And you say that in the book, go deeper, go home, which is one of
Go
my
deeper,
mantras too. It's we're human, right?
Yeah.
So you're human, we're human first, and then we're teachers. And we're not privy to the bypass of any emotion. We have emotions, we have energy. Emotions are energy. Emotion, I always say that.
Yeah.
So there's something always, there's a messenger behind, a message behind every emotion. So yeah, I call it the sacred rage. It's that Kali energy that is within all of us, right? And anger is one of the greatest catalysts of our lives. Like, it sparks something within you, and it's up to you to channel it, right? Because no emotion is bad or good.
Right.
It's like, how are we channeling that energy? Right. First
Mm-hmm.
we're labeling it, but even the label, sometimes it's like, just feel it in your body. Like, where do you feel it? What's happening? It's, yeah, I love it. I love it. You're walking the walk. I like to say we're walking the walk, talking the talk. And that's, I knew, I was like, I have to have her on the podcast.
That's integrity. And if we're going to put ourselves out in the world and want to help people, then damn it, show up in integrity, like, be authentic and admit when you're not, when you're out of integrity. And yeah, it's a beautiful journey, putting Wise Little One out and reminding everybody that you have a very wise part of yourself that is your true self, and learning how to, as you and I said, peel back the layers and unbecome who you thought you were to become who you're truly destined to be requires work. Happiness is our birthright, but it sure isn't handed to us in a silver platter. We got to work our ass off for it, to be able to. And it's the simple things, right? Because then you arrive and you're like, oh my God, that tree is beautiful. And birds are so beautiful. I used to think old people were weird because they like to look at birds. Now I'm like, I just love birds. I want to look at birds.
There's like a funny meme that's going around, like, oh, I'm now the bird watcher. It's like, look at that beautiful bird out there. Yeah, no, I'm the same.
Yeah.
It's appreciating, it's seeing the magic. And we have to have that contrast. And I think the greatest teachers are honestly the ones who have been in the fire, who have been in the trenches, right? Who wants to hire someone who hasn't been in the trenches before in their life, right? Who's had just, a beautiful, a positive upbringing and all those things. there's that meat, that depth there. And that's what I love too. I just loved reading your story and how you were listening to these conscious tapes in your car. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, in the 90s, like you were already, back then it was in the, like, no one talked about that stuff. So it's amazing to read that, and just your process of manifestation coming from that trauma and coming from all that, and just the way you were manifesting, and you were just doing it so naturally.
And that was what I was saying earlier about like the disassociation. I was making my inner world more real, right? I'd read a Cosmopolitan and I'd take myself and journey to Costa Rica and see myself there living like the models were, and I'd never even left this small town. I'd never been on an airplane or anything. And the next thing you know, a series of events happens. I end up in Costa Rica. I end up meeting the president of Costa Rica. I
Oh
mean,
my
there was
gosh, that's amazing.
there were so many. Elvis inviting us up to his suite. I mean, you take somebody with, my husband, when we met and I would share all these stories, he was like, oh my God, you have to write a book. He's like, you've lived like many lifetimes in one lifetime.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's because you'll hear people who are like, oh, it's just so easy to manifest. There's all that in the coaching world now too, of the manifestation techniques. And it's like, to go to see it all in life, right? To really feel that, those negative experiences, and to do what you're doing, and to embody this dream, these visions that I'm sure you had peeks into as a child, right? I mean, even your older self coming to heal your younger self and telling, like, that's, I believe it. I've experienced that as well. It's amazing. I'm in awe of you, honestly.
Oh, thank you. I mirror you to you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. What would you say, if someone's listening to this and hasn't met their shadow and hasn't tapped into their inner child, what's like one thing you would say for them to begin? Because it is a lifelong journey.
Mm-hmm. I think, every person, we're getting ready to do a retreat in Florida, and the welcome letter, it tells them, bring a picture of yourself under the age of 7, around 4 or 5. That's a really clear picture to look at yourself. Put it on your wallpaper on your phone. That's the first step. Just begin to make you, little you, real, a part of you. If you want to go as far as putting it in a frame and putting it next to your bed, begin to make that little girl or guy real, because they're your emotions. And many of you are walking around as adult children. I'm 50 acting 5. We see it all the time. Somebody with road rage or somebody who can't regulate their emotions are adult children. That's the ego, right? And we want mastery. We talk about free will. Most people don't have free will. Free will comes when you are not reactionary to your conditioning. So you're able to respond in the moment through conscious awareness, even though the heart might be, all the stress response might be going off, but you're able to breathe through it and monitor it. A couple months ago, I had an appointment with the doctor's office, and the girl in charge clearly had some energy with me. And it was very bizarre. And she was very argumentative and really trying to push me to have a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And my heart was beating. I'm a HeartMath facilitator, so I was doing intelligent energy management techniques while it was happening. But I was also in witnessing awareness, talking to myself. So my soul was talking to little Jana. And what I was hearing was, you've got this. All you have to do is breathe. She's wounded. Hurting people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
She's behaving this way because this is where she's at. Just breathe through it. So I got very quiet and I just let her go. I just didn't say anything, because that was the best response, was no response. And that, now I could have broke out a can of whoop ass. I could have said many things. I have no problem doing all of that. then I leave, and what would have happened? I would have imploded. I would have judged myself. Well, later I found she was following me on Instagram. So she had created some, idea who I am, but maybe she just was trying to trigger me to see, am I really a good emotional healing teacher? I don't know. But it was a great lesson. And I held that girl as a teacher. When I left there, I thought, yeah, there was a part of me that called her names in my head and did all the normal human stuff. But then in the end, because I rode the wave of the emotion, I ended up in a place of, I love me. I am so powerful. I just moved through like that situation with ease and held my head high and felt so good about myself. And little Jana felt safe. She felt safe because I didn't respond like my mother when people would trigger her, what she would do, or my father. I've learned how to regulate and hold these intense situations and keep calm inside of me in the midst of chaos all around me. That's free will.
Beautiful.
That's supernatural. That's mastery, right? That's not being a slave to your emotions. That's being a master of them. That's saying, no, I'm in charge. It's okay. I know you're upset. I know you feel the trigger. I know your heart's beating. I know you want to punch them. And listen, Deepak used to always say, sometimes the appropriate response is to hit somebody. Maybe it is sometimes, it's wabi-sabi. It's a little mix of all of it, right? But I certainly want to walk away from situations feeling really good about myself.
Yeah, it's true that standing in our mastery and parenting little us, right? And allowing little us to have a voice. Like, I love journaling, sometimes I'll just channel little me and I'm angry about this. And, using journaling has always been I channel journal. So I'll like channel little me during a time of deep emotion. And it's much better than cursing someone out in person, right? But yeah, no, thank you for sharing your truth and sharing your wisdom and your story. It's really courageous and amazing. And thank you for being on Soul Over Matter. I had so much fun talking with you today.
Me too. It's been a privilege. It's just went by so fast too. So
where
you,
can
Michelle.
people
Thank you for
find
all
you?
you're doing.
Sorry.
Thank you for all you're doing to the world, having this podcast and these conversations. Yeah, so people can find me at janawilson.com. That's the book page designated for the book. I do have another book my husband's co-authoring with me, The Emotional Healing System. It's a practical guidebook. It'll be coming out in early summer next year. The Emotional Healing Retreats website is emotionalhealingretreats.com, Instagram, all of that's on the website too. So you can find me that way. Amazon, all book retailers, local bookstores can order the book, so anyone can get it that way. I plan to have the Audible done, if it's in my highest good, by the end of the year. So that'll be complete as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jana, for being here.
Thank you.